The Bible's full of stuff you never read. You just can't keep it straight in your head. I'm gonna tell you now what's in that book. Okay, so look. Hey, welcome to episode 3. In this one I have a surprise. I actually have gotten a guest. I've got my act together and I'm gonna make this like a real podcast. Or at least a longer podcast. So, we have Brandon Corbett with us here after the chapter reading. So after that ends, stick around and you can hear Brandon and I talk about things. The plan was to have them be related to the chapter. We did not get around to that. So instead, they're just related to us talking about religion. Check it out. If you think you can do better, let me know and I'll get you in an upcoming week. Anyway, on with the reading. Genesis chapter 3 verse 1 through verse 24. Fear and loathing in Eden. As insinuated at the end of the last chapter, things don't go so well for Adam and his as yet unnamed wife. A serpent tells the woman to try the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and so she and Adam do. Immediately upon eating the fruit, they realize two things. The first is that it's weird to hang around naked all the time, and so they sew some clothes from fig leaves. The second, larger realization is that God is going to be ticked off when he realizes what they've done. Now, they're right about this, but let's pause the story for just a moment to examine the situation. As I mentioned previously, there's a major problem with sticking the tree of the knowledge of good and evil right in the middle of the garden, and then telling the two people there that they can't eat it. Now, many have asked the question, why not just put the tree somewhere else instead of tempting them? However, this overlooks the larger issue, which is this. Without knowledge of good and evil, what does don't mean? Obeying and disobeying don't have any meaning if you don't know good from evil. Without the knowledge to differentiate the two, they're just two actions like turning right or turning left. If you're not looking to get anywhere in particular, any direction is the same as any other. As such, serpent or no, the people God stuck in the Garden of Eden were bound to eat from the forbidden tree eventually, because although they've been told that they shouldn't, they didn't yet know that doing what you shouldn't is bad. The whole thing was a setup to begin with. And really, one might hope for a deity to be above that sort of juvenile prank. This is the first of many indications that the authors of the Bible have not fully considered the light in which they're depicting their God. Anyway, after eating the fruit, Adam and his wife put on their fig leaves and hide in the bushes, so that God won't find them and ask what they've been up to. This works about as well as you'd expect, and so it's not long before Adam invents what has become a time-honored tradition, passing the buck. God asks him about the fruit, and he immediately blames his wife. She, quick on the uptake, points at the serpent. The serpent must have panicked because it says nothing at all, which is sort of a waste, as it's one of only 2 talking animals in the entire Bible. God, annoyed at the whole situation, curses everyone involved. The serpent he condemns to crawl on its belly forever, which is presumably what it was doing to begin with, so that's really less of a curse and more just rubbing it in. Adam's wife is cursed with the pain of childbirth, and also with having to obey her husband, which is a demotion from her previous status as an equal helper. Interestingly, only after this curse does Adam finally get around to naming his wife. He calls her Eve, a name related to her status as a bearer of children. Adam is cursed with having to work for a living from then on, and is told that eventually he'll die. Then God makes both him and Eve some nice leather clothes, and kicks them out into the world, leaving behind some angels and a flaming sword to safeguard the tree of life. Again, this seems like a poorly thought out plan. Leaving a big fiery beacon to go, "Here is the tree you shouldn't go to," is perhaps not as wise as just hiding the tree. On the other hand, at least Adam and Eve know what shouldn't means now, so it's a definite improvement. They never did try to get back into the garden, so clearly it worked, but I still think that God just lucked out on that one. God says something interesting in Genesis 3:22 as he's banishing Adam and Eve. He remarks that, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil." Us is a really interesting word for a deity in a monotheistic religion to use, and the one of us construction doesn't really allow for the argument that maybe God is using the royal we. He could just be talking to the angels, of course, although as the angels have no free will, it's debatable whether they really know good and evil either. It's possible that some of the angels pointed this out to him, which would explain how they get stuck on tree guarding duty for the rest of eternity. God doesn't take a lot of lip from his creations. Hey, Brandon, who are you? Tell me things.
Name's Brandon. Originally from the DC area. I've lived in DC, the Maryland side. I've lived in Virginia side. I've also lived in Richmond, central New Jersey. Right now, I live outside of Baltimore. Right now, I work in association management and communications, particularly in advocacy. Deal a lot with government relations and PR. My background actually is interesting because before I got into association work, I was a theater major for undergrad, and I actually worked in theater in the DC area for about 3.5 years. And then I somehow got into associations and nonprofit, and been doing that ever since. To be perfectly honest, it's mostly because theater doesn't pay very well.
That is absolutely true, and it's a darn shame, but
Yeah.
it's the great truth that many of us have realized.
Anyway, so another thing, married, got a great wife. We're probably gonna be starting a family pretty soon. And now here's the interesting thing. See, I was raised Jewish. My dad came from an Orthodox family, and he intentionally chose to leave that and go on Reform Judaism. Now, at the same time, actually, which is an interesting kind of turn of events, my grandmother, who basically raised him in the Orthodox community,
Mhm.
eventually became an atheist.
So after she raised your father, she became an atheist?
Well, actually, not only after she raised my father, but after her first husband died, and life just kind of changed drastically for her.
So
And
was her? Did she feel God abandoned her? Did she feel that she had been wrong the whole time? I mean, was this like a rejection or a discovery or what?
she, I think when you live in that era, I mean, this was like the 40s and 50s, and I think when you live in that era, you tend to, and you're a woman, you tend to defer to your husband in that way. Like you tend to not really try to have much of an opinion of your own. And I think after her husband died and after that event changed her life, she started to feel differently about how she viewed the world, and started to obviously do a lot of thinking and a lot of self-evaluation. So I mean, I think it was something that didn't really come overnight for certain, but it definitely had an effect on it.
But do you think that was like a positive move for her or a negative? Because you hear about people abandoning the church or abandoning their faith, but this sounds like it was a thing that actually helped her become more of a fully realized person.
Well, that depends on how you look at it, because the rest of our family is still pretty involved with Judaism to at least one degree or another. And the truth is that she's still, by all definitions, a cultural Jew. Like there is nothing. She is a quintessential Jewish grandmother. Just because she's an atheist doesn't mean she doesn't make mean chicken soup, or she doesn't do everything that a Jewish mother does, including guilt.
Oh man, the guilt.
Oh yeah, the guilt is all of it. It's when we do start talking about religion, she takes exception and is, she's very into Richard Dawkins, and she's of the atheist ilk that kinda is about as fervent about their atheism as a lot of evangelicals are about Jesus.
So where do you fall on the spectrum?
I would definitely consider myself an agnostic. I'm not sure what the nature of the universe really is. I don't have any evidence that God exists, but I don't really have a whole lot of evidence that there's nothing, not a higher power. There's really no. I think it would be really presumptuous of me to actually say one way or the other. I mean, the thing is that I think that the people who are atheist and say that there is no God, they're very assured in their belief. And the thing is, it is a belief that even though what they're doing is they're saying there's no evidence for God, so I'm not going to believe in God. And that's understandable, because believe me, I also believe that if I can't see something, if I can't see the evidence that exists, it's really hard to believe in it. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I'm just way too committed to intellectual honesty about it. And so I just can't say, well, I've never not experienced the presence of God. I would say that there's been times where I felt something. When I was in Israel, for instance, I went when I was about 16 for an entire summer, and like all good Jews who go to Israel, you go to the Wailing Wall, the Kotel, and you do the thing, and you put the message in the. in the cracks of the wall, and you do your thing, and you are surrounded by all the guys with the hats and the things, and you're just trying to do your own thing, and they're kind of bouncing back and forth, which is called davening, and they're just kind of doing the prayers, and you're just kind of trying to quietly reflect to yourself, and they're being a little loud. But I would definitely say that when you're there, you definitely feel something that is different. And for me, at the time, I was 16 at the time, and I thought to myself, wow, this feels something. Maybe I feel some kind of spirit or some kind of thing. And I kind of looked at it later, and I thought, well, what I also might have felt is just the presence of everyone's strong faith.
Well, and that's it. It's not just the faith of the people who are currently there. It's the understanding of the thousands of years of faith of people who have been there. It's the weight of history has its own impact.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. You definitely feel the history. I mean, it's you go there, and you go there with your bias already, because you've already been taught. You've already gone through your bar mitzvah. You've already gone through all the training, the religious training, the I don't want to call it indoctrination, because as a Reformed Jew, we're not really indoctrinated. We're told these stories, and then we're told to ask questions and decide whether or not we want to believe anyway. But
sure, I think it's still indoctrination, but it's at least they've left the doors open.
Well, right, and at the very least, they've left the doors open and have not threatened excommunication if you decide to not chill in the synagogue every Friday night.
Right.
You go there, and you've already got a lot of it. It's already loaded. You've already got all these different thoughts going through your head. So it's really hard to have a purely objective experience in a place like that. And it's funny, because I've dated a couple girls before I was married who, before they went to Israel, they were very secular, very liberal, were very tolerant of all different types of practices, and then they went to Israel, and it changed everything. They started becoming super religious, and they either got very conservative and or converted to Orthodox.
Well, it's fair, but it can work both ways, because, as we all know, Jesus went to Israel and became a Christian.
Well, Jesus wasn't a Christian. That's the thing. Jesus wasn't really a Christian. He was just Jesus. He was just like, hey, do you guys want to maybe try something different? Because we've had this kingdom for about 1,000 years, and now the Romans are here, and it kind of sucks. So let's maybe change the way we're doing our religion, because it's really kind of not working. And of course, the rabbinical council was like, you jerk. But yeah, that's the thing about Jesus, that I'm a big fan of the big lessons that he wanted to impart. Which were that, all those, 613 rules that Leviticus pretty much laid out is not really helping, and it's not really a good foundation for a good religious society. And so, he comes around and says, hey, let's just, keep the commandments, but let's start loving each other a little bit more. And apparently people were threatened by that. And the worst part about Christianity in general is not necessarily that it exists, but the fact that no one really pays attention to the things that he says and the things that he imparts about loving your fellow man and forgiveness and pacifism. And it's absolutely astounding that we have these different forms of Christianity, but in reality, what we really have is American Christianity, which in itself can be diverse, but of course, the basic image is that of Jesus is white and red-blooded and kicked ass or something like that. And yeah, and then there's there are people who believe in Jesus as this, icon of, pacifism. He sacrificed himself for sins, etc. The Jesus that they talk about is just purely an American construct. And and I think what a lot of people do, and a lot of cultures do, is that they project themselves onto Jesus. They project themselves how they see themselves as good people, if they see themselves as good people, and then they project themselves onto Jesus. And, it's been done throughout history, too. The Holy Roman Empire, I'm sure, looked at Jesus in a way that, they could rationalize whatever they were doing at the time. and Americans do that too. But we definitely have a more unique version of Jesus in recent years. It feels like, which is a shame because I really think that it could have been he could be used as a figurehead for good. And the funny thing is that you look at Judaism and we have these the founding fathers of Judaism. We have Moses. We have some of these other guys, but none of them have the same level of importance to our faith, or the Jewish faith rather, as Jesus is to Christianity. Jesus is the center of it, but in Judaism, God is the center of it. So it's an interesting comparison to make, I think.
Well, especially because, I mean, as you were saying earlier, we're taught to ask questions, and therefore God's at the center. But that means that's who we direct most of our questions at. We're most concerned about whether he's right or not, whether we should listen to God. So it's interesting. Center is he's the point of most assailing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never been able to get behind any religion that looks down at other people. But I mean, I think that's kind of the nature of religion, is that a lot of people are very convinced in their righteousness. They're very convinced that whatever they believe is a truth. I mean, that's actually what gospel means is truth.
Right.
So it's really hard to run against that and try to say, well, I think differently. In fact, when I moved to Richmond, the first time when I was in high school, and it was the first time, when I lived in New Jersey, I lived in mostly a Catholic town, and Catholic and Jews, for the most part, at least in, recent history, have gotten along for the most part. We have a lot in common. But when I moved to Richmond and I started to really get to know evangelicals and Baptists, I was told for the first time in my life that I was going to hell.
Sure. It's an important part of their faith. That they're right and other people are wrong.
Absolutely. It was a very important part. But it was also, for a 14-year-old kid, for the first time, to be told that's terrifying. I mean, think about. I think about that. It was terrifying when I was only 14, and yet I think about all the kids who have been told this when they're as young as 4 or 5, and that to me is even scarier. And that's what I just don't believe in, the keeping a faith by fear. Keeping a faith by fear is probably one of the most toxic things I think we've ever seen in our society.
What do you think faith should be kept by?
Doing good, man. God, I mean, that's the thing about both. And actually, that's one of the things that Jesus tried to keep about what he was hawking, was the social justice aspect. I mean, that's what Judaism really, a lot of liberal Judaism is today. It's all about the social justice stuff. I mean, despite people like, Sheldon Adelson and a lot of prominent Jewish conservatives out there, the vast majority of, Jewish Americans, like about 70%, consider themselves liberal. And I think there's a good reason for that, is that, Judaism, at least at its core, in the modern day at least, teaches a certain amount of responsibility to do things that help the world, tikkun olam, healing the world. There's that whole thing in the Talmud that says if you save one life, you save an entire world. That's a really essential. That's what a lot of Reform and conservative Judaism has really latched onto.
Absolutely.
And it's really essential. Now, the funny thing is that, not all Jews are like that, obviously. There's all kinds of different people out there. But, I don't think I've ever met a rabbi at a synagogue that I have attended regularly, at least when I was a kid, that didn't espouse those values. And I think that's really important. And I will freely admit that there's plenty of people from all religions that are really hardcore about the social justice, and they're advocates for the disenfranchised, the poor, for everyone. Even people who don't necessarily fall into their religion. But I think, when you've got a faith that not only wants to discriminate against people for whatever reason, but they also want to make the policy. They want to make it a national level policy and enforce their beliefs on other people. I think the refusal to acknowledge the pluralistic nature of America in general is probably one of the biggest tragedies and the biggest missteps of a lot of religion in America in general.
That's fair. All right, let's wrap this up, I think.
All right.
Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, all religion can be definitely a force for good. I would say that a lot of the things that I've done in my life when it comes to giving back, it probably comes from that place. It doesn't mean I do not enjoy sitting in synagogue. That's just the thing. I can, like, if I go, like, I'll go if my dad is singing in the choir or something like that. If sometimes he subs in for a rabbi once in a while during the summer too. So I'll go check him out. I'll go, like, watch him do his thing. And I'm sitting there reading, like, the prayer book, and my eyes get heavy. I just cannot stay awake. There's just something about it just puts me to sleep. And there's a lot of people that find beauty in it. It's like someone just, like, hit me with a shot of Valium. It just doesn't work for me.
Hey, well, everyone gets a different thing from religion.
Yeah, man.
Well, awesome, man. Thank you very much for talking with me.
All right, no problem, Micah. You take it easy.
Absolutely. You too.